Hello and welcome to a very, very special episode of the Passing Through podcast. This episode was recorded on the 4th of July from Wrocław, Poland, where I'm currently passing through, and I had the honor of passing through with the incredible Douglas Rushkoff. He is one of my personal favorite podcasters, and just in general, personal favorite people in the world. So it was a thrill to get to speak to him, to get to pick his brain about certain things, to talk to him about love and shamanism and politics and Timothy Leary and death and an assortment of other things that for me was just an absolute joy. One of the things about this podcast that's becoming more and more special to me, and I'm very grateful to the listeners of this podcast, is how it enables me to connect with people that I would have never dreamed of being able to have a conversation with. You know, I spoke in the last 3 episodes to Robert Falconer, Emer Burke, Douglas Rushkoff.
Douglas Rushkoff.
Douglas Rushkoff.
These are incredible people. They are unbelievable human beings, full of just wisdom and love and insight, and that I get to speak to them is a rare treat. I don't know what I did in a past life to deserve this good fortune, but I am happy that I can try to capture the little nuggets and morsels of beauty and truth that just drip from their lips and share it out here to all of you. So thank you to all of you who listen and who like this podcast and who like it on Spotify as well. Actually, it's funny. Asha, my partner, I asked her if she had liked my podcast, and she said, yeah, I like it. And I said, no, but did you like it on Spotify? And she said, you can like podcasts on Spotify? I didn't know that that was possible. And when we went in and did it, she indeed hadn't liked the podcast yet. So we're not together anymore. But yeah, I don't want this podcast to be some self-promoting bullshit at the beginning. That's just me making a joke. But I really, I have deep gratitude for the listeners, for the guests, for everything that makes this podcast possible. And I want to thank Asha for introducing me to Douglas Rushkoff. And that must have been now 6 years ago, maybe 7. So this podcast was very special. I mean, I don't know if Douglas Rushkoff needs any special introduction. He is an activist. He's a writer. He's an educator. He is so many things. He's an author. He's written almost 24 books, I think, perhaps even more. His most recent one is called Survival of the Richest, and I really recommend you to check that out. I recently read Media Virus, which was incredible. If you're interested in a really beautiful deconstructionist approach to the many different media personalities of Michael Jackson or Madonna, or you want to have a very interesting read into Beavis and Butthead or Ren and Stimpy, you know, any of these kind of cultural phenomenons, the psychedelic nature of MTV, which for anyone who wasn't alive back then in the 90s when MTV came to be, I guess actually it was the late 80s. I'm not even 100% certain there, but somewhere in that time period, MTV was doing things that no other station had done before. It was a media phenomenon. And Douglas's book Media Virus goes through some of that and why that was and the psychedelic nature of it, and just a very illuminating, insightful, pleasant read. It exists somewhere between like Noam Chomsky meets Adam Curtis meets Neil Postman. Very, very cool stuff. So you could also find Douglas on his podcast, Team Human, which is also the title of another book of his. Yeah, I could dedicate probably a 20-minute intro monologue just praising and fawning over Douglas Rushkoff, which I don't want to do here. So if you're at all interested in this, any of these topics like activism, environmentalism, music, counterculture, psychedelia, um, technology, podcasting, anything like this, I think this is going to be a podcast you're going to enjoy. As I said, we talk about Timothy Leary. We talk about the recent Supreme Court ruling, which basically reinstates monarchy in America. There's all kind of stuff in here. So I don't want to go on too much longer. I'm just sweating in a hot van that has no oxygen in it, fresh after the interview. And I'm really excited to just get this out there and have people listen to it over this holiday weekend. So thanks again, Douglas, for spending some time. It was really a beautiful experience for me. And I hope everyone else enjoys this conversation as much as I did. And as far as an eco tip, yeah, I should give you one. I don't have one handy, and my computer is almost out of juice, so I need to be really brief here. It's the 4th of July. Don't light off fireworks. Maybe that's an eco tip. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure all across America today there are going to be an assortment of mistakes made. Somewhere in Florida, someone is going to light their trailer on fire with a Roman candle. Somewhere else, someone's going to burn down a forest unintentionally. In emergency rooms all across the country, people are going to come in missing fingers in grisly, grotesque, cartoonish fashion. There's going to be all kind of weird stuff happening today. So maybe just keep things cool, save your fingers, save the earth. Don't accidentally commit arson. And yeah, be good to one another as always. And happy 4th. Okay, Douglas Rushkoff, welcome to the Passing Through podcast. It is an absolute honor and a joy to have you. You are one of my personal favorite people. You exist at this intersection of things that are really important to me, like technology, psychedelics, environmentalism, activism, writing, music, education, podcasting, just to name a few things. So yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for being here and all you do in the world. And this, for me, is a dream.
Oh, well, thank you for letting me pass through with you.
So because I like to try to create a different kind of space on this podcast, one that's a little more honest, a little more vulnerable, a little more human, maybe we could say.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to share that I'm a little bit nervous. I'm a little bit stressed. It's kind of like going on a date with someone that is like way above your league or something, where I have a little bit of nerves. And so I just wanted to share that and empty it so that I could be more present for a conversation.
Oh, well, that's sweet. Yeah, I'm in a funk myself. So I'm interested to see how distracted from myself I can become, you know.
Is it anything that you want to talk about? The funk?
Not really. It's just all my personal shit, you know. Going through stuff and transitions and figuring out my own path, you know. And sometimes you just have to go through it. So I'm just figuring out how to kind of metabolize my own trauma, how to metabolize other people's trauma in the healthiest way possible. You know, it's sort of, you know, how do you be like a mushroom, you know, and kind of turn shit into life, or turn crap into shit, then into life, you know.
Yeah, I like that. Actually, this topic was also something that's alive in me. One of the questions I had thought to ask you was, because there's this mantra on Team Human, find the others. And there's this, and we're encouraged to kind of discover our communitarian beings, connect with others, really dig into this experience of what it's like to be human. And to me, part of that experience is also digging through your own shit. It's digging through what's inside of you, this very deeply personal kind of spiritual journey of discovery. And how do we balance those two things? Like, are they at odds? Is there a tension between finding the others and finding yourself?
Well, I mean, in some way, it's really hard to find yourself without others. You know, it's interesting. I mean, the folks who are having the best results with, psychedelic healing and development tend not to do 5 grams of mushrooms and sit alone in the attic. But they're finding really works well is to have one or two other people holding space for you or with you while this happens. And why is that, right? Because your nervous system, at least to use the materialist side of all this, your nervous system is calibrating to the nervous systems of the other people there. If they're in a kind of an open state of compassion, they can help you process whatever it is you're going through. It's the same as, when a person's dying, you sit with them. There's even people who do that, professionally, death doulas and all. And sure, there's the actual mechanics or telling the person it's okay or whatever, but just sitting there and holding their hand, or even if they can't be handheld, just your presence in the room, being there, helping them metabolize the journey, either out of body or to the next thing or to nowhere, is very real. And it's like, it's as alone as it gets, right? Is the death process, but still to do it with others there, I would think is the way to go. So I don't know how much sure, isolation is fine, but even people sitting, even meditators, tend to like to do it in groups. They even have, online groups of meditators where you're together. And that's I don't know, it makes sense to me. I remember the, ancient Hebrews. There was a law, you're not allowed to study Torah alone. You got to study it with a group of other people, and what's that about? It was that, that this most, deepest self-seeming stuff is kind of always best metabolized in some kind of a social context. Now, the interesting thing about Find the Others was, originally it was a kind of a Timothy Leary quote about finding the other people in the community. And I tried in Team Human to expand it to mean find the other others, find the others and try to connect with them, the people that you wouldn't normally or easily connect with. I guess what I'm realizing, you can't just do that. It kind of does help to have a home team, to have a not necessarily a tribe that's against, visitor team, but kind of a mess hall for the other people who are, going through what you're going through, and that's okay too, to have some friends.
Yeah. Yeah. Friendship is super important. And there are so many things that you just said there that I kind of want to spiral off into. And I'm not sure exactly where to begin. One of them is the healing nature of community that you spoke about. And I've experienced that recently because I'm a facilitator in training in the M. Scott Peck community building method. And for me personally, when I went into this community space, I was very skeptical about it. I thought, yeah, sharing my problems to a room full of strangers in a circle, I don't know how much that can help me. But then when I was actually in the space and space was being held by people who are trained to do this, something special happened. There's something alchemical, something like this mushroomy, metabolizing trauma thing that you're describing, where all of the attention of everyone else that was there suddenly opened something, you could feel in your heart, just something opening, and pain melting through like some sap just coming out of the body. And it was remarkable. So I know what you mean, that there is something special and unique that can occur inside of a group. And I don't know what is unique to the group, because in one-on-one therapy, when I've had that in the past, it wasn't the same kind of experience.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's we evolved that way. It's how we lived and dealt with stuff for however many 100,000 years. We were around before, capitalism and isolation and, the professionalization of compassion. it's
Mm.
see, it's kind of like saying, God, I my body felt so much different when I was eating, you know, organic vegetables from this garden than when I'm just at home eating Twinkies. It's like, yeah, when you're with a group of people, you're experiencing love and social connection, and it's I mean, to me it's like air. When I'm not with people in something approaching that for a long time, I kind of feel like I can't breathe. My heart starts to knot. So much so that if it becomes too rare, like really since COVID, it became much more rare. My life became more solo, I suppose. That it becomes almost painful when you're with that group, when you're finally there in a situation that for your heart to open, it's got to untie this awful kind of Velcro cemented knot that it's been in, just so protected. So if you notice, and it's painful to be with people, it means you need to do it a whole lot more.
Yeah, that's great. That's great advice. Yeah, and it's true, that resonates with me, because my experience was similar. The world seemed to get a lot smaller, paradoxically, a lot smaller and a lot bigger at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the things we get teased about now, like people going to, yoga classes or AA meetings or whatever it is. It's like, it's just the excuse to have those bodies in a space together, not talking about shit. It's like, you can go into the discount store, you go into the Walmart, there's people there, but it doesn't quite, you don't quite have that feeling of togetherness and community. But, you do a, sun salutation or downward dog with 6 other people in a room, like it or not, you're all acknowledging that you're going through something together. We may all, as you would put it, be passing through, but we're passing through together, right?
Yeah, 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 and I guess that's where the magic is, right? That that connection. That's what it's about. One of the other things you said earlier when you were talking about death and the kind of lonely aspect of death, but being with someone and holding space with someone and kind of giving them that community in death. There's also a tremendous beauty in there, because that's the moment when the person is literally passing through to a different realm, and being there with that person. Like I was reading on your website the other day what you wrote about Timothy Leary, and you being there at that later part of his life, and I was wondering if you would talk about that a little bit, because it seemed really, really beautiful, and I wondered if there's anything for some listeners who may not know that about you, how you came to know him, and what type of wisdom you took away from him.
Yeah, I mean, there was wisdom there, and he was a good counterexample for a lot of us too. I mean, Leary was born in like 1926 or something. It was a different time. A different way of being a man, a different way of getting attention, a different way of getting things done. He was a counterculture hero before there were countercultures. So, or before it was acknowledged as a thing. So it was just criminal and dangerous, and he lived through a hard life. Where the president of the United States called him the most dangerous man in America. and lived in jail and had escaped from jail. I mean, this is a whole thing. So I lived through nothing, like what he lived through. And by the time I knew him, he was already, through the jail thing and escaped and pardoned and whatever. And he was living in L.A. in the mid 1980s. So it was kind of a decade after his, most intense period. And, and he was interested in some of the cyber stuff, the really early cyber stuff that people weren't talking about. I mean, and this is where kind of I cut my teeth by being, one of the first, sort of originally, I guess, East Coast journalists. Even though I lived in LA, I was kind of an East Coast type. To take these things seriously, to say that, computers are going to change things, that these are not just for pocket protector geeks to, count stuff, that people might use these things. And Leary was one of those people too. Leary was beginning to write about, that this one day people are going to be sending each other messages through word processors on their desks, and he had written a program or had a program developed called Mind Mirror, which was kind of an I Ching like psychoanalysis platform where you learn about yourself, typing in answers to a bunch of different kinds of questions. And he was playing with it. And I was working at a magazine called Exposure, which was kind of like Details, or one of those, there was a bunch of 1980s magazines like Interview and sort of culture stuff. And I convinced them to let me do a kind of a series of articles on like virtual reality and the future of humanity and all that in the 80s, and commissioned this piece from him on, the sort of the psychedelic nature of virtual reality and new technologies. And he wrote this thing that was, a couple of thousand words, but it was pretty incomprehensible. It was kind of free thought, and it used a lot of his lingo from his books from the 70s about exopsychology and starseed transmission and all this kind of stuff. And I was just like, this isn't gonna, people aren't gonna know. Is it okay if I kind of do an edit to it to kind of explain what's going on? And he was like, sure, yeah. So I did this pretty heavy edit of it, and sent it to him. He was on email. Most people weren't. Sent it to him or faxed it to him, maybe it was even at the time. And like a week later, he comes marching into the office of the magazine, holding this printout. And he's like, where's Douglas Rushkoff? Where's Douglas Rushkoff? And I'm like, it's me. And he goes, he's like, this is not what I wrote. And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Leary. Then he says, but it's great. And he was like, where did you get these ideas? It's fine. This is wonderful. This is, what I would have said if I understood what I really wanted, and it turned into this, oh my gosh, he likes me. And then, we were just friends after that, and would, he was just this kind of party animal. We would just go to art galleries, and he would find the wine and have 2 cups in his hand at all times, and stay by the band and not talk to people unless they were from the Mamas and the Papas or some crazy cool people. He didn't like posers, but he liked musicians, and he liked people he knew were fellow travelers, I guess. And he was also a bit of he liked famous people. Susan Sarandon is there. Oh, we're going to go, or Oliver Stone's coming to the house today. So, we hung out, and we were part of that early kind of cyberdelic rave posse. Mondo 2000 was part of that. Fringeware and Boing Boing, and there were people who understood. Terence McKenna understood that. Oh, this technology. Steve Jobs understood this technology is highly psychedelic in its kind of effect on people, and and then so we were friends right through the next 10, 15 years. And he got prostate cancer in the early 90s. And for whatever reason, it was either too late to do anything about it, or the things he would have had to do for it didn't seem probable enough to make it worth treating. So he chose not to. And then, a bunch of us were there. There were these, younger people who were more like his videographers and all, and people who'd made these kind of fun, weird projects with him. And they moved into the house and just started trying to collect his archives and scan everything so that he could, do that. And there was not enough money. So I helped him come up with this idea for a book called Design for Dying, which is sort of how to die consciously. And I served as his literary agent to get it sold to, I forgot who, Eamon Dolan at wherever he was, some publisher. And so there was enough money to keep things going. And then, and then, he was going to do the whole go into space thing. He had this bracelet, this medical bracelet that said, how to freeze him and what to do with his body, so that, and what number to call so the Alcor people could come down from San Francisco and take his head and freeze it in a can or whatever. And a few weeks before he died, they came, to do like a final checklist with him. And when they left, he said, I want to cancel that whole thing. He says, I don't want to wake up. I don't want to wake up in some future with a bunch of people like that with clipboards, forget it. So then he just, he was going to die and go to whatever was next, if there was anything next. But it was intense. The those of us that were with him got to experience, what happens to a person as their, body decays, the blood and the shit and the, it's you lose control of your body, and it's potentially crazily super humiliating, particularly for a guy with his kind of big an ego and into somewhat of a macho trip as Leary. But it's so vulnerable, it's so intimate, it's such an honor to be with someone as their defenses necessarily go away, and to be there and to treat all that with dignity, and respect for the human being that's still inside there is, it's a whole thing, so I really, some more than me, I really respect their ability to shepherd, Tim through that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That sounds like a lot, but also beautiful.
Yeah, it was tough though. He was a tough guy. Being with Tim was like being on acid. He was tough on you. Any sentence, he was like like the mean psychotherapist. Any sentence with any contradiction or self-doubt or whatever, he pull on it like a friggin', ball of yarn. Zero tolerance.
And did his death change your relationship to death, or how did it affect you beyond understanding this kind of like beautiful gravity of being there with him through that?
Well, his death, along with Robert Anton Wilson's and Terence McKenna's, kind of led me and a number of people to begin asking, well, who are the elders? It's kind of like when your father dies. It's like, well, where's the ceiling? And a few people, the names aren't important, but a few people kind of tried to assume the mantle of the new elders of the new generally white male, spiritual guru leader people to shepherd us through the thing. And a bunch of us realized together, I think, that we're moving into a more leaderless or leaderful society. That, the 20th century was about these mostly dudes, the good ones and the bad ones, whether it's, Hitler and Stalin and Mao, or Mandela and Gandhi and Martin Luther King. That, movements had these figureheads, march with me, eyes on the prize, here we go. And the counterculture, we had our own, that generation of great men who helped usher in the future, or prepare the landscape for us, or teach us what was going on. And it's not the way it works. It's part of why you look at the American presidential election. It's part of why we're so stuck here. It's like, well, if you're going to have a president, you need one of those guys, right? One of those guys. So that's why there's people in their 80s or whatever, because they're the last of those kind of dudes. And people are just having such a hard time imagining the left almost as much as the right, for all their identity politics, maybe because of their identity politics. It's like, well, a black woman is not going to fly with America. It's like, get over it. It's a black woman or a gay guy or whatever it is. This is because it's no longer, it doesn't have to be that thing anymore. That the dudes in the cement statues, I guess there's stone statues around, that's not, leadership is changing and has to change if we're going to move into, like what you're talking about, more of an M. Scott Peck communal, can I borrow a drill reality. It's going to be less hierarchical. It has to be. We've got to grow up. We can't live in a world with daddies anymore. It's like, when I said before, as a person, when your daddy dies and you realize, well, now it's just me in the sky. There's no generation above me. I think we have to realize that as a civilization. Daddy is dead, and that's okay. So rather than continuing to fight against the echoes of, white male European colonialism, blah, blah, now what? Now what do we do? It's turned horizontally toward one another. It's what we tried to do with Occupy, but kind of failed.
There's so much there. The three things spring to mind that I don't want to forget. So I'm going to jump to that book that you were helping Leary write. Did it ever?
It's all right. It's recorded.
Did it ever get released?
Yeah, it was weird. So we hired one guy who will remain nameless to kind of extract it from Tim. The idea was he was going to do all these interviews and then transcribe them and then kind of turn the interviews into a book. But he got so distracted by the circus of Timothy Leary's house. It was women and drugs and parties and Tim, and that he ended up really not doing anything. So when it came time to turn in the book and there was nothing there, and I had agented it and Tim was dead, what I did was called Are You Serious? Who I knew was looking for work. For however brilliant Are You Serious is, he's like always struggling to make a living at what he does, which is odd because I think he's better at this than most of us, but maybe it's because he's better. He's always struggling. So I was like, dude, do you want a job? So I convinced the publisher to let him do it, and he found an old manuscript that Tim had been working on with Eric Gellixson, who was one of the founders of virtual reality. That was a lot about the human body and our experience of consciousness and all. And he had a lot of Tim's interviews and writings about death and some of the tapes that were recorded in the house back then. And then he turned it kind of into a book, and so it did come out, this book, Designed for Dying. But it was a little bit different than the original intent, which was, really how I mean, the beginning and the end have it, but how we've made death so taboo in the West. But it's so much part of life. It's the ultimate taboo, the ultimate binary. It's and Timothy had been involved with death since the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which is something that he and Metzner and I think Ramdas translated or retranslated together as kind of a psychedelic guide. Here's read this when you're tripping, or have it read to you, and go through the Bardo experience or something. So he was already he'd been thinking for 50 years about the place of death in life.
Yeah, great. I'm gonna have to look into that book. I know it's not the original intent, but I'm happy it exists. I'm curious to read about it. I had a death doula on this podcast, and we talked about the taboo nature of it and how we've outsourced death and dying to the funeral industry and all the evils that come along with that. So that's something I also feel passionately about. But there are two other strings I want to close on the last thing that you said. One is about elders. You mentioned that the elders were gone, and this is something that's alive in me right now, because I'm wondering, how do we define who an elder is? Because it's a very important role, and when I look around, I see a lot of old people, but I don't see many elders, and I wonder how would you what are the criteria for an elder?
Well, I mean, an elder is someone older than you, and as most indigenous societies practice, there's an assumption of respect for your elder. The Native American house, the elders eat first. You feed the elders, then the children, and then you. I don't want to fetishize elders the way people like fetishize primitive man or something like that. It's not quite like that, but they've had more experience at this. They've been through more things, more traumas, and they're closer to the end. It's just we don't need or want elder celebrities. They're all over the place. There's a difference between a movement's leader and an older person. The older than me woman on the bench in town, waiting for the bus with her dog, is a font of wisdom. It's just they're not, in our society, they're not nurtured. They're not generally given positive feedback for the value that they create for the rest of us. And it's very American. We're into, what is new. People are more likely to ask Justin Bieber for advice than, the old man doing welcoming at the Walmart. And again, it's a value system. Oh, well, if he's only welcoming people at the Walmart, then he must be a loser. How did he end up at 75 doing that? And it's like, because maybe he wants to, it's fun. When I go and vote, for the most part, at least in my town, the people who do the polls are kind of older, retired people who volunteer because it's something to do, or sometimes if I get in a car, a cab, or a Uber or something, and it's some retired person, and they've got their stocks and their things, they're fine. They're like, oh, I get to meet people and drive around, and it's like, it's funny for us, like, oh my God, to meet people. Who wants to meet people? People suck, and you got to take them where they want to go, and maybe they smell. So, they're around. But, when I talk to, Tyson Yunkaporta, he's an Australian Aboriginal scholar, and he talks about, and I spoke to like this, he wouldn't even call them elder, but whatever, like my mentor, this woman, Lady Hawk, whatever, and it's just like, it's automatic that he has access to a network of people who are wise and witty and generous. Now, in America, you'll hear more, I got an audience with Ken Wilber last week, and he said this to me, and it's fine. I mean, God bless. I'm glad they had the experience, but you know what I mean? It's like the lateral availability of teachers and elders and wisdom in a network kind of is way more consonant with how other systems work. Who's in charge of the coral reef, but how does the information flow? It's different. And I feel like, the 21st century, if we're going to make it through this, is going to depend on us being able to access that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's what you're saying reminds me a little bit about this difference between hero ball in basketball and actually like team ball, where we have this tendency to want to play hero ball, find the person who's the best, give it to the
Right.
Kobe, to the Jordans, to the Bryants. But really what needs to happen is you need to dissolve that, and you need to have this beautiful interplay and sense of community on the team, and the team is the hero. There's no one person.
Yeah. Except when it works, like when LeBron was at his best, there was this feeling, you could put him in any team and just get on the ball and he's going to get it there somehow. He had a few years there like that. But I mean, it's funny because basketball was developed in part to promote that team ethos. It was a passing game.
Yeah.
An opportunity. It was started by like a priest or something to teach teamwork to boys. But there have been periods where the hot dogging and the individualism have triumphed over that team thing. I mean, and it happens. Look, sometimes people become president who are more authoritarian than team oriented.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes they win.
That was actually the last question, the last thread of that's hanging that I wanted to address is, it's not lost on me that we're having this discussion on the 4th of July, on American Independence Day, 3 days after the Supreme Court made this ruling that to me is just, I'm still baffled by the ruling. And I wrote down the dissent from Justice Sotomayor, where she said that the relationship between the president and the people he serves has shifted irrevocably. In every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law. And it's so odd and terribly ironic that we seem to celebrate and covet this. We got our independence from monarchy, and we are now elevating the president to the status of king.
Yeah. It's I mean, I don't know that is happening because we as a culture or society still want parent figures, and we're too emotionally immature to accept what we now see as the responsibility of democracy. Democracy is like, oh, wait a minute. I mean, I got to actually make the decision here about what, I understand that people, there's that element in it, but for this, it feels much more like, much more just like plain old corruption. Some people kind of stole the ball and are doing bad things to it. 2 or 3 of the justices are being paid by billionaires while they're, doing this thing, and other ones, are get put in place by the would-be dictator and feel some either allegiance to it, or maybe they were put in place because they had this kind of federalist, whatever that group is, or what's this, the Heritage Foundation people, or because they got those weird ideas. Although it's interesting, you look at there's a new book out by a friend of mine called it's called The Hamilton Plot, and what he really reveals is that the founding fathers were elitists. The founding fathers did not believe in democracy.
Yes.
They really didn't. But they incorporated democracy into the Declaration of Independence because that became kind of the best way to advertise and enlist the MAGA movement of that era into the war against the British. But it wasn't their actual ruling ethos.
Yes.
And in some ways, America is reverting to the founding fathers, or the majority of the founding fathers' actual understanding of who liberty was for, and how this should work. I mean, I think it was Jefferson or Hamilton or somebody when they were looking at voting, they're saying, wait a minute, but you mean land people who don't own land are going to be voting? What? That doesn't make sense. So are we undermining 200 something years of or are we reverting to the mean? Are we going to the more normal state? Europe after World War II had this kind of liberal democracy thing. Europe was very Bernie Sanders in its mode. But you're looking at France is going beyond red in its understanding of stuff. It's hard to peg exactly what's making this happen, but I'd argue that the metaphors being offered by the far right are more consonant with the sensibilities that you and I are describing, the positive sensibilities, than the facts offered by the left. I spent 10 or 20 years of my career writing books like Life Incorporated, Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus, the good conditions on the ground, the actual numbers, here's what's happening to people, like any good Marxist would do. Conditions on the ground trump all this fantasy and stuff. But when we start talking about, mycelial sensibility and the Gaia hypothesis and the respect for the elders and all that stuff, it's much more heart and soul driven. It's more in the province of intuition and sensibility.
Yes.
And the left has not and I understand why. I'm an academic. The left sees it as a compromise to superstition and to fashion and to touchy feely Oprah Winfrey, boomeritis to engage with this stuff. But this is not okay boomer. The boomers were fucking yuppies, man. The boomers were not this. They made the new age movement into a pyramid scheme. What we're talking about is one's actually lived experience of life. And it's really hard to have metrics for it. If you go totally into the metrics, the assholes win again, right? You go totally into the metrics of utilitarian effectiveness, and you end up with the effective altruists who've calculated with an Oxford philosopher that any person does more good in the world by being an asshole, earning as much money as possible as an asshole, and then donating that money to charity. If they do more good that way than they do moving through the world as a good and charitable person. And I don't buy that. I think that's inefficient. That's like saying Mark Zuckerberg could do more good now, taking 90% of his money and shoving it back into the economy, than making Facebook 90% less harmful. So it's screwed up. So when you go totally into the numbers, they're great to use. They're great to have some metrics and things, but they always end up. This is what Christ was trying to say to the poor Jews. It's like the law is beautiful. You wrote all these laws, and you can keep going. Talmud could go forever. You can get ever more granular in the, okay, if your cow goes on the neighbor's lawn and screws up their grass, but the neighbor didn't maintain their fence, then it's not really totally your fault anymore. You can go there, but in the end, it's going to come from the heart. You gotta bring good faith to it. And that's what the Trump administration showed, was that if you don't bring good faith to the way you conduct business, there's no amount of laws, there's no amount of constitution that can protect us from that. So in some ways, the Supreme Court acknowledgement that the president can do whatever the fuck he wants, in some ways is healthy, because it means that, it actually does matter. There are no guardrails. These guys have had the briefcase the whole time anyway. So even if it's against the law, for a surgeon to stab you in the heart while your body is open, he could still do it while he's there. It's like, so he'll get in trouble for it,
Yeah.
Accountability. It's like accountability. If someone ends the world, their accountability doesn't much matter.
Ooh, that's a haunting soundbite. It's the stuff that you're talking about this heart space and these good intentions and these soft, fuzzy, more felt kind of phenomenological, embodied, less academic sort of existence is something that has actually been really alive in me, and it was actually like the bulk of what I wanted to talk to you about, and now we're already deep into this conversation, so maybe it would be nice to pivot here a little bit at the end and talk about things like magic and shamanism and animism and psychedelics, and because to me all of these things are connected. Like there's this network, like you're describing, this mycelial network of all these things and this beautiful interplay, and they come together and kind of metabolize the trauma, metabolize the toxins, metabolize all of these things and make them something beautiful for everybody. I mean, at least that's what I feel. That's what I think. And I wonder, for you, is there a similar sense of that? And if so, like how can people get closer to that, especially people on the left, like you're saying, where there's this kind of barrier to entry, it seems, even though there shouldn't be. Ideologically, people should be aligned with those types of things.
Well, should. Should is a strong word. So I don't want to tell people, you should do this, you should do that. Leary used to really, because he took one of my books. I think it was Playing the Future, and he started reading through it, and he started circling every time I said should or must or something like that. He's like, "Oh, we must do this. We must do that. You tell us, Rushkoff, what we must do, who we should be. Command your commands. Yes, sir." He's like, fucking man. He was rough. But he was right. And I've become really, for the last 40 years, really conscious of that. It's hard, I'm getting a lot of pushback for suggesting that, magic and hope and things like that are most likely ways out of this mess. I was just talking to Grant Morrison yesterday, and he was, he's so upset that, that the people in power are basically using black magic. They control all the resources, and they're using, propaganda to control reality, which is a form of black magic. And they're aware of it. Trump was raised on Norman Vincent Peale, the power of, positive thinking, and the sort of it's kind of where theosophy went in under capitalism, is think and grow rich, which is basically applying magical sigils to acquisition. So it's like half of magic went in that direction, and the other half feels so soft and inconsequential, and the province of upper middle class white people in Ithaca, Madison, Wisconsin, or Portland, and a way for them to ignore the pain and suffering. And for a wealthy white person to sit in a local community ashram and meditate as a way of metabolizing global trauma is understandably looked down upon by someone who's saying, what are you doing for the child whose hand is being blown off in Palestine right now, or in Gaza? Which then gets to the question, and I wrote a sentence, and it had a whole longer explanation around it, but I ended a paragraph in a recent piece by saying, yes, it is okay to experience, it is okay to engage in an experience of bliss while someone else is suffering. Which is a really hard sentence for me as somebody who, since I was a kid, had trouble blowing out my birthday candles, and making a wish other than, to stop world suffering and may others, let's have world peace or whatever. It's like, but, I've come to believe that those of us who are privileged enough to have occasional experiences of bliss or joy or compassion or processing, we owe it to the collective human organism to have those. It's like the healthy part of a tree is obligated to do as much photosynthesis as it can to send nutrients to the parts of the tree that need to recover from some trauma. It's just, you got to make sure you're connected enough to the whole organism for that to be happening. So it's not saying, oh, you can go be Jeffrey Epstein and have dormitories in New Mexico for teenagers to give you sexual services, and that because you're having great orgasms, it means you're helping Palestinian children. It's kind of not, again, it's not that. That's a justification. You gotta figure out, where your line is to not cross over into that. But, for most of us, the way we move through the world can actually have material effect on on others. I mean, just a super simple example is the less oil you use, the less oil wars we need to have, the less power you're giving to extractive oil companies, the less pollution you're making, the less AI you're trying to play with. Sorry, the less massive pollution, the fewer children need to go into mines to get their rare earth metals, the less that Facebook and Amazon need to be buying up lakes, to get the cobalt or whatever's in there, or to pollute water in order to cool their whatever they're making. If you move through life, and I don't just mean like trying to recycle plastic, which is all fake anyway.
Yes.
Well, for the most part, it's sent to China where it's like burned or something. Or recycle plastic, and how much energy that takes to recycle plastic. It's like crazy. These are not that's not the kind of way I'm moving through life I'm talking about, but a sort of a major kind of behavioral shift, an understanding in what is pleasure and what is not, can have material effect. There's only so much you can do politically for people on the other side of the world, but we can collectively, through our choices, we can disempower the folks who are doing the nastiest of stuff, and we can kind of help downscale the structures that are perpetrating this pain and inequality.
Yeah, and there was something else that I wanted to add to that I've heard you say in a different podcast that seems to dovetail with this, is this idea of awe and cultivating awe, and this is also a vehicle to kind of facilitate these types of changes and growth and shifts. And I look around and I wish that there were more ways for people to recognize awe more easily, because it's all around us, right? Like, if lately I've been interested in animism, and really it's resonating with me because I think back on human history, and for 99% of the time that we've existed, we've been animists. And only lately in modernity, suddenly the earth is dead, inert, void of spirit, empty. And if it is, then it allows us to do what we do to it. It allows us to plunder it, extract it, mistreat it, and do everything that we do. And in a truly animistic sense, like, everything is sacred, everything is wondrous, everything is spiritual, everything is incredible. And I think anyone who's ever done a psychedelic can probably report back a similar feeling, like yeah, that everything becomes alive and starts to shimmer and glow and is suddenly full of something so special. But for the average person, or the average like daily experience, there's monotony, drudgery, tedium, boredom. And I think awe and cultivating that through art, through conversation, through participation, through community, whatever it is, potentially is a way to sublimate on and change all of those things that we're talking about here. And I know we're about time, so maybe I would love to keep talking for another hour, but I know that's a holiday there, and your time is sacred. So I'm just wondering if you have some closing thoughts on this topic, or there's more stuff in that realm that you would want to add as we close out here.
I think it kind of comes back to the breath. We can argue whether and how a more animistic understanding of reality would assist human civilization in moving towards more systemic, reciprocal, circular, karmic understandings. and then, you know, correspondingly better solutions. To me, it seems obvious, but a lot of people say that's because I'm too boomer influenced, and it's magical thinking and wishful thinking, and that it's engineering and rationality that get us out of this. That Francis Bacon was right when he said, you know, that empirical science will let us take nature by the forelock and hold her down and submit her to our will. That's how you go. And there's a ton of doctors who use antibiotics to kill what's bad, and have some success at it. And then there's other doctors who look at the gut biome as a living system and say, oh, there's ways we can nurture something else here. And, you know, your behaviors and your attitudes and your diet and your environment. And there's a whole lot more going on here than we've got pathology reports for. And for all our concern for reality and conditions on the ground, our instruments don't reveal everything that's going on the ground. That we're moving through our world a bit like Mr. Spock, you know, looking at a planet through his tricorder. You know, yes, there's good information there, but also you need Kirk just kissing the aliens, you know, and, you know, moving through it, you know. I mean, he was kind of a white colonialist in his own way. You know, there's a whole other thing there. But he meant well in a certain way, and that he was moving through these new realities experientially rather than just instrumentally. And I think it's a time to do that, particularly for, you know, the progressive left to do it, and not through superstition or purely to make people feel better, but in order to access some of these more subtle systems, because they're there, and for so many other societies, they dominate decision making. You know, the phase of the moon, it matters. Talk to any woodcutter in the European forests. The phase of the moon matters to what happens, what kind of wood you get when you cut down a tree on a particular week. Phase of the moon matters in terms of your work cycle, in terms of your psychology, in terms of your sex, in terms of everything. So it's not so woo, you know, fantasy, controversial, nutty. It's part of what's going on. And our alienation from all of that, I think, is part of what allows us to be alienated from the Palestinian child whose hand is being blown off at this moment. You know, it's not over there. It's not over there. It's here, and it's now. And there is an alternative comportment that we can develop, that can acknowledge and metabolize and correct, you know, these injustices.
And that alternative comportment is,
I mean, again, we'll get in trouble. It's love, you know. Sorry.
No, that's beautiful, and I think I think that's a natural place to end here, to respect your time. Yeah, that's perfect, and vibrates my heart, at least. Yeah, Douglas Rushkoff, this conversation I would love to have again, or dedicate an entire one to just this stuff, the fuzzy love, shamanistic, animistic aspect, which is where I hoped to steer this conversation, but I guess I didn't. I wasn't an effective steward. I wasn't a great pilot.
I spoke too long. It's fine. I spoke too long. We've got a little more life yet to get to that.
but yeah, it was great. Thank you for your time. Thank you for spending a part of your Fourth of July with me. Thank you for passing through. Usually, I conclude the podcast with a minute, like a meta minute of what you spoke about the breath and about love. Usually, I invite the guest to just breathe for a minute and try to summon that. We can be the white men in the ashram that you spoke about. And
Okay.
okay, sweet. So let's just spend a minute and then we'll say goodbye. Okay, Douglas. Thank you for passing through. Um, I'll have places in the show notes where people can find you. I'm sure you're no stranger
Cool.
to many of the listeners of this show. But if there's anything you wanted to plug at the end here, you also have the floor to take us out.
Uh, just come find me. I got a lot of good stuff to read and look at, so
Okay, sweet.
it's okay. Or just go on with your day. It's all good.
All right. Thanks, Douglas.
All right. You be good.